Hey, gorgeous. Thank you so much all for being here today to talk about diversity and inclusion on and off the screen. But we're going to be specifically looking at embedding anti-ableism and disability access within film. And if none of those words mean anything to you, don't worry, as we'll absolutely be getting to that today. But I just wanted to ground today's session in saying, first off, that everyone on this panel is and identifies as disabled. They don't only have expert knowledge, they also have a wealth of lived experience, which very kindly they are going to share with us today, which is fantastic. Now, I've been to a few European film festivals in my time, and I feel like the conversation around disability is still incredibly new. Even within the UK, there's still such a huge way to go in terms of disabled stories, crew, cast, even access within film festivals. So I just wanted to acknowledge that this conversation is very much the beginning, not the end. And also that a huge shout out to San Sebastian for inviting us here to talk today, because otherwise we wouldn't get to share this with you, which is wonderful. So I'm not sure what's brought you here today. Perhaps yourself, you identify as disabled. Perhaps this is a day for connection, for advocacy, or perhaps this is your first time engaging with disability and you're not really sure where to start. Either way, we're going to open you with open arms. And thank you very much for coming today. We have 90 minutes together. I'm going to try my very best to make this an incredibly exciting discourse. First off, we're going to be talking about the foundations of disability. What is disability? What is ableism? How do we talk about it? What sort of models do we use to discuss disability? And then we're going to get into like the nitty-gritty of like disability filmmaking and talking about representation on the screen. And then at the end, we'll have 25 minutes for some questions, which is really fantastic. So, hello everyone. I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Claire Baines. I am an inclusion partner at the British Film Institute. I am also a filmmaker, a podcaster, and an all-around lover of talking about disability, so I'm very excited to be here today. I'm just going to quickly self-describe for anybody in the audience who might have sight loss. So I am a white woman in my 20s. I have dyed red hair. I have some very cool sunglasses on. I have yellow trousers and a white top, which is the only self-description that I need, which says disabled and hot. Woo! I'll now pass on over to Shani Danda, who is a disability inclusion and accessibility specialist, a social entrepreneur and broadcaster. Shani Danda!
Oh, thank you. Hi everyone, it's great to be here. Just to start with my visual description, I'm a South Asian disabled woman and I have a short stature. Today I'm wearing a yellow printed dress and I have long dark brown hair and nude heels. Should I do my intro now?
Yeah, do your intro now. Okay. Let's go for it.
Yeah. So I work with lots of different businesses and brands, really helping them on all things disability, inclusion and accessibility. It can be from things like policies, procedures, to product design, innovation, to marketing campaigns. And I also have been in films, on set on films. Actually, I started out with Justin a very long time ago. And yeah, advise lots of different organisations, including Cannes Lion, on inclusion, as well as lots of British soap dramas, my favourite being EastEnders. So yeah, I'm really passionate about representation, accurate portrayal of disabled people, and our involvement in the film industry as well.
Amazing, thank you, Shani. Yes. Justin, would you care to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Justin. I'm a 5'10" white man in his early 50s. I have a greying beard and long curly hair. I'm wearing a black cardigan, blue polo shirt, and blue jeans and trainers. Yeah, I run a company called 104 Films. We specialise in disability and film. We've been around for about 20 years. We have made all sorts of films. We made a film called Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll with Andy Serkis playing disabled punk rocker called Ian Dury. We made a film called Notes on Blindness, which travelled very well. I think played at this very festival a few years ago. And we also, as well as production, we do training. So we've always been very keen to get disabled people on set and get disabled voices behind the camera and in front of the camera. That's really important to us, authenticity. I'm hard of hearing, so people might be looking at me thinking, who is that guy and why is he on a disability panel? He doesn't look disabled to me. So I'm hard of hearing, completely deaf in one ear and hard of hearing in the other ear. I don't wear a hearing aid because I was a rebellious teenager and I threw it away and said it's other people's problem if I can't hear them, not mine. So that's me. Thanks.
I love that. It's very punk. Yeah. So, disability. What is disability? What do we mean when we're talking about that? Would you like to go ahead, Shani?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we're all on the same page when we're talking about disability inclusion. It means lots of different things to lots of different people, and rightly so. It manifests in different ways. It has different meanings in different cultures and countries. But I'd like to just take a few moments just to go through a few principles of where we should be when we're talking about disability inclusion. And I think we've got some slides to help us do that. So if we could get the first slide, please.
There we go.
Yeah, great. So what I'd really love people to understand is that disability is actually an experience. So I was born with my health condition, but I'm not disabled 24/7. I only experience disability when I'm faced with a barrier or a bias. This way of understanding and thinking about disability is what we call the social model of disability. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But as Justin alluded to, disability can be visible and non-visible. It's not all about ramps and wheelchairs. In fact, in the UK, we know that the majority of disabled people live with non-visible conditions and impairments, and that's 70% of disabled people. So essentially, disability is a social construct because, yes, we all live with different health conditions and impairments. You can either be born with them or you can acquire them throughout your life. The likelihood is that a lot of people will acquire a condition or an impairment. 83% of disabled people in the UK acquired their impairment. So this isn't a subject that, can be ignored. It's going to affect a lot of people. It may affect you, a loved one, a family member, a friend. So if disability is a social construct, it means it doesn't also have to be that way. We don't have to go around in the world disabling one another. And what I don't think is that people wake up in the morning and think, you know what, I'm going to make people experience disability today. I don't think...
Actually, I do.
Maybe some people.
Yeah.
But essentially, we do this unknowingly. Can I get the next slide, please? And largely because that is sometimes due to unconscious bias that we have as well. Sorry, I didn't realise there was a clicker here. We've lost the slides. I'll keep talking. So if you just think about why you have the thoughts about disabled people that you have, where have you seen the representation of disabled people? For me, as a British South Asian person, I grew up on a diet of severe over-exclusion of disability representation. We have something called Children in Need, which is a charity telethon fundraiser, and that portrays disabled people as, charity cases. It portrays us as people who are victims, objects of pity. But there was nothing ever to counter that narrative, so that's the representation that I grew up on. Then came shows called The Undateables, which was a dating show for disabled people. And then we have really other extreme narratives like when we had the Paralympics, there was a marketing campaign calling them superhuman. And then we have awful headlines calling disabled people benefits grounders work show. So what I'm trying to say is we have very extreme polar opposite representation of disabled people. And personally, I believe the portrayal of disability especially in the UK, is that either everyone thinks you're a benefit cheat, like you just want to live on benefits, or everybody thinks that you want to be a Paralympian. That isn't accurate, is
Yeah.
it, guys?
Well, Keir Starmer has just opened up today saying he was going to crack down on benefit cheats, wasn't it? It sounds like a broken record from 14 years ago.
Yeah. But when we talk about unconscious bias, why I'm talking about that, it's important because this happens unconsciously within our brains. We make decisions about people and groups and communities in a fraction of a second because of what we have learnt about this group or community or what we have been shown about them as well. So that's why it's really important that we have something to help us to disrupt our bias as well. Not just about this topic, about lots of different topics as well. And many organisations, if they haven't already, are starting to adopt something called the social model of disability, and many disabled people, especially in the Western world, or those who know about the social model, excuse me, feel that resonates with them. I just want to caveat this by saying not everybody adopts a social model, not everybody likes a social model, but I think a lot of people that we know do.
It's pretty standardised.
Yeah, it's quite
for definite.
standardised. Absolutely. Lots of organisations adopt this, lots of governments as well. So on the screen, you may be able to see, I have an illustration of a woman sitting in a wheelchair in front of some steps and a big sign that says, "Weigh in, everybody is welcome." So the medical model is something we all probably know about. Even if you don't know, it's called the medical model. And this views disabled people as the reason that they can't access society, because it's viewed that under the medical model, disabled people require fixing and require curing in order to be able to access society, in order to be able to integrate with society. So the medical model blames the whole entire person, essentially, for living with that condition or an impairment. But I'm not bashing healthcare, by the way. It's very important for us to be able to have a good quality of life. We have that relationship with our healthcare providers, but you know, there aren't fixes and cures for a lot of people, and that's okay. That's a whole other topic that we're not going to get into. And this is where the social model of disability comes in. And the social model says, you know, well, no, why don't we just create accessible places, spaces, products, services, and then the world would be much more inclusive to many more people. Because when we focus on the social model, we're focusing on reducing and removing those disabling barriers. I don't think any of us really, probably in this room, are medical professionals. You know, for example, I can't use public transport in London. There's no point in me ringing my doctor. My doctor can't do anything about that. It's the responsibility of the people that design the infrastructure. So what you really need to understand is we all have a responsibility to play in reducing and removing disabling barriers.
Mic drop.
Because the truth of the matter is that actually disability affects all of us. I've got an infographic on the screen, and I'm gonna bring this to life in a minute. But we've got the 4 senses: touch, see, hear, and speak. And there's 3 different categories: permanent, temporary, and situational. And this image is taken from Microsoft's Inclusive Design Toolkit. It's a fantastic free resource. I encourage you all to go and check it out. But what I mean by disability affects us all is that disability is an average part of the human experience. It's an average part, but people see it as sometimes a bit of a tragedy because it's never been represented as just an average part of the human experience. I'm nearly 40 years old, and it's only in the last couple of years I've accepted that disability is a neutral thing. There are people in this world that can be born with or acquire conditions and impairments, and I just happen to be one of those people. It's to be expected. That is how humanity is across the world. But let me help to bring this to life. So if we take the sense touch, for example, under the category of permanent, we have somebody who has upper limb loss on one side of their body, so they permanently only have the use of one arm. And then if we go to temporary, we now have somebody who has an arm injury. So although they have two arms, for a short amount of time, they only have the ability to use one arm. And under situational, we have a new parent holding a baby. So if we gave all these three people the same task to do, they would all experience the same barrier. So it's really important to understand that disability doesn't only affect people who live with health conditions and impairments. There are lots of different ways, situationally and temporarily, that we all would experience that. And I'm sure many of you have in this room as well. So we've talked a lot about what disability is, what it isn't, how we define it. And I just wanted to help give you a bit of a framework on how we remove these stubborn, disabling barriers. On the screen, I have a few images. I've got 3 different people of 3 different heights. We have a tall person, an average height person, and a short person. And they're all at a football game. And there's a wooden fence in front of them, which is preventing some of the people from accessing the game. So in the first image, everyone has been given 1 box each to stand on in order to help them see over the fence and see the game. So this is an example of when we treat people equally, it doesn't go far enough because not everybody is starting from the same point in life. In the first image, the shortest person still cannot see this football game. So equality doesn't go far enough, and applying a blanket approach to things isn't going to always work either. So let's move to the second image of equity. Now everybody's individual needs have been taken into account, and everyone's been given the support that they need based on their different height, for example. So the tallest person actually didn't need anything to stand on, whereas the shortest person needed 2 boxes to stand on. And this is good. Equity is good. And I think most approaches to inclusion are probably somewhere in between equality and equity, but we can do better than this. And the world that I want to live in, and many other disabled people want to live in, is the world where we are removing these stubborn, systemic barriers. Because in the third image, the whole design of the fence has now changed. And now nobody has to ask for adjustments or and rely on other people to access society, because that systemic barrier has been removed. Now, this is a very black and white situation. Of course, there's so much more nuance to this in real life situations and scenarios, but I just wanted to help give you this as a bit of a framework in order to help you to disrupt your bias. Think about, what is the systemic barrier and how can we remove it? And this isn't just applicable to disability inclusion, but lots of other types of inclusion too, for lots of different diversity strands. So we've got a bit of audience interaction now, so I'd like you all to get involved with this. But I've got a couple of random everyday objects and items and things on the screen, and I'll read them out in a second. But there's one thing that they all have in common, and I'd like you to guess what that is, and feel free to shout out when you want to have a guess. If anybody definitely knows the answer, please don't shout it out. Let's give our audience members the opportunity. But some of the things include a computer keyboard, an electric toothbrush, a bendable straw, audiobooks, captions and subtitles. We have a dropped pavement curb, things like your Google Alexas, home hubs, that sort of technology, automatic doors, the ability to text the emergency services. I can see a lot of quizzical faces. Does anyone want to have a guess? Just feel free to shout out.
Way to repair the barriers, is that what I heard? Yeah.
Sort of. That's not the answer.
Yes, and.
Thank you.
Yes, and.
Yeah.
Yes, and. Yes.
Really? Yeah. Any other
Thank you for being the
guesses?
first person.
Yeah,
it's always the
thank
hardest. I'm hearing some whispers.
Yeah,
I'm
let's
hearing
hear-
something to do with your eyes. We're hearing.
No,
That's a no.
not all of them. There's one particular thing that they all have in common. Any other guesses?
I genuinely don't know.
Really?
I'm kind of
Okay.
excited for the big reveal.
Okay,
Yeah.
this is good. Come on, people. What do you think?
Access, something.
Something you can touch? No.
I think you're going to have to put us out of our misery, Shani.
Should I put you all out
Yeah,
your
I think
misery?
you should.
Okay, all of these everyday random objects were originally created for a disabled person.
Oh.
And we all use them. So let me quickly help to explain some of these things. So a computer keyboard originated from a typewriter, and a typewriter was created for a blind lady to write her love letters. Aww. We have dropped curbs, which we find at a pavement. In the UK, we know that they came into our infrastructure after the Second World War, when lots of people were coming home injured from the war and using wheelchairs and mobility aids. But, you know, if you've ever pushed a pushchair, you would have probably used that. Wheeled luggage down the street, you probably would have used that. Things like an electric toothbrush and a bendable straw, were created for people with low dexterity. The ability to text the emergency services and captions and subtitles were created for the deaf community and hearing loss community. But who doesn't watch TV or films or things without subtitles? Audio books, I've had my subscription for that for a very long time, but that was created for the blind community. And then things like, you know, WhatsApp voice notes, that sort of technology, the Googles and the Alexas, that sort of stuff, that was, again, all technology created for disabled people. So the point I'm really trying to make here, that accessibility is the right thing to do, it benefits everybody, and there's lots of countries around the world where there are specific laws about this as well. Whether it's about employment, whether it's about how people access content, whether it's about how you treat your employees too. How are we doing on that?
I think that's gorgeous.
Yeah?
Yeah, gorgeous.
Great,
Perfect.
thank you.
No, thank you so much, Shani. Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully we're now all on the same page about disability and in terms of the fact that it's all about removing the barriers. I kind of want to quickly go to you, Justin, in terms of, you mentioned briefly at the beginning that 104 Films does disability training. Now that we've kind of had a little taster in disability training, can you speak to why that's so important in a film setting and on a film set?
I mean, film sets have traditionally been one of the most inaccessible places on Earth, I think. So that's why it's been so important, you know, to do the work that we and other organisations, and we have quite a lot of organisations now in the UK who are brilliant, DANC, Creative Diversity Network, who are really encouraging more diversity behind the scenes. And the key we've found is that there's a diversity within disability, that you need somebody who's a specialist in order to put those reasonable adjustments in place for people who are disabled on set to make sets accessible. So we, in the last few years, and I'm not sure how widespread this is in Spain, but certainly I know that in France and other countries around the world, in the US, we have a role called an access coordinator. And the access coordinator, their job is they're experts about disability, and they will come in and they will talk to disabled crew members, and they will figure out what has to be put in place in order for that person to do their job on set. And you'd be surprised how many people have disabilities on set. Sometimes people who have disabilities on set don't realise they've got disabilities. I mean, when I did my first film 25 years ago, I had a huge panic attack. I didn't even know what was going on, you know, in the middle of the shoot. And it would have benefited me immeasurably, you know, to have somebody who understood that, because actually I just had to hide it, you know, and mask that behaviour on set. So now we have people who come in and will work with crews, and if they have mental health issues or they have, you know, anything across that diversity of disability, they will talk about it and they will put measures in place in order to make that that person's job doable on set. I think we've got a film about this as well.
We do, guys. We have a film.
I should say we made this film based on some short films we did for Film 4 in the UK, who are one of the big film funders that we have there, broadcaster. And we made 4 short films with disabled writers and directors. Some of the films were about disability themes, some not about disability themes. But the commonality between them was that we had 25% of the cast and crew were disabled on these films. And so we really needed the role of the access coordinator. We needed people to come in and work on these projects. And we've got a short film that we'd like to show you about it, and hopefully that'll be a springboard to a bit more discussion about this subject. Can you play the film?
Mo! There, could you just let me push my glasses up? Oh yeah, always. Here for you. Thank you. So a bit like that. If we just do it, like enough of talking about the theory of working with deaf and disabled artists. Just do it.
Take a look, superstar.
Very shiny.
I know. Your face is prancing off though.
Mo, she's very sweet. She's very subdued to begin with, and she grows in confidence later on.
I play the character of Ali. She's best friends with Mo, and she's a very extrovert, flamboyant. What I love about her friendship with Mo is that they bring out the best in each other.
Every single bit of this film has both of us in it. It came from us going, what would we have liked to have seen as young people? And us kind of going as millennials, what's the queer high school rom-com that we didn't get? And so we're going to make it. Yeah, pretty much. Matilda and I have always, in everything we've done, made it a space that is inclusive and accessible because we both have different kinds of disabilities. So from how a space on stage should work to how the hours of a film set should work, things that seem immovable and like they are stuck in stone and we can never change them, and that's just the way it is. That's completely not true. And supported on set by things like Access Coordinator. Yeah.
I am the Access Coordinator on this production, and my name is Jess. And an Access Coordinator gets involved across the entire production, and we are here to make sure that the whole production is accessible and inclusive. The day in the life of an Access Coordinator. So I would become involved in the project. Best case scenario, from green light, maybe even as the project is being developed, so I can make sure that I'm bringing in loads of disabled voices as well throughout the creation of it. And so I send out an access passport, and it's a whole bunch of questions. It could be anything from, how do you prefer to be contacted by me? Like, do you prefer WhatsApp, or do you want to be emailed? Right through to, are you a wheelchair user? Do you want to disclose anything about energy levels that we can take into consideration? So we end up with a kind of package that can be really bespoke. And it's all about ensuring that people are able to thrive at work without having to worry about all these kind of other bits and pieces that might get in the way of them being able to just like get on with their job, right?
And this was the first time I worked with an access coordinator. And actually what was really different about working with an access coordinator was realizing how much access coordination I have to do for my life anyway.
Yes.
So it was like, this was really lovely to be able to hand over some of that responsibility to someone else. So I could then just focus on the work, focus on getting to set, focus on being present.
You'll never regret employing a disabled person because they are natural problem solvers. Because they have to do it as part of their daily lives.
It's like 1 in 5 working age adults have a disability. 1 in 5. Like in Morehart's Kira, we've got multiple kinds of disability.
Yeah.
Both visible and invisible. Like 100%, we've got multiple deaf characters because that is what the world is like. It was, nothing in this was forced. That's just true.
That's why we need to invest in my new crypto LGBT NFT trading app.
Ultimately, my aim is to make my job obsolete. That's the aim. The aim is to make the industry so naturally inclusive and accessible that you don't need someone like me, like wagging the finger anymore, because everybody just knows this and this is just standard practice, right? But the only way that we can do that is to like throw the door open and invite more people in, more people who are deaf, disabled, neurodivergent, learning disabled, autistic, and who are allies of those people too. Because we need those authentic voices in the space.
I've got an idea.
And they're badass. They're badass and they've got a different perspective. And they're just gonna like reset the world, man. It's gonna be cool.
So the idea was to do a climate change love story based on the idea that when we are in a climate emergency, but when we're really in the shit of climate emergency, the wheelchair batteries will be really hard to come by, difficult to use, and forming that with a love story at the centre of it, a sort of road movie-esque rom-com, felt like a really smart way to just shine a different light on climate change, really.
Well, I worked with Tom on a monologue he wrote for a series called Crypt Tales, and I really enjoyed working with him. And I think he's a wonderful writer, and and a really serious emerging talent.
What's the matter, sweetheart?
It's too bloody hot. And how am I meant to eat my dinner when the constant bloody light always makes my stomach think it's lunchtime?
I think I'm just not hungry.
Yeah, that's more like it.
It's important because for years disabled people have been disenfranchised and let down and hurt and shunned by film and TV, to the point that you have able-bodied people playing disabled characters and winning awards for it because they just didn't want a disabled person to play a disabled character, which is just mental.
Curfew.
But the role itself, and it will vary from production to production, some of us will be part of the writers' room, so sort of helping plan the writers' rooms, checking over the scripts and the development of it, making sure it's all going out in accessible formats. And then for other people, they might do that as well as the actual production side, which is what I've been doing here, which is, sending out, access rider forms for people to fill out, giving them the opportunity to speak to you if they want to. And it's giving them an option to speak up and to ask for what they need in a very safe environment. And knowing that, someone is looking out for them. There's a stunt where one of our actors is pushed out of their chair. So it was a case of obviously knowing what the action is written as. But, we got very lucky. Zach was ready to fly out of his chair if he needed to. But then it was also working with the stunt coordinator and, making them aware of kind of who these people are and, what he needs to consider when staging the stunt.
I'm getting to be really evil. Everyone's making me feel very safe, but I'm still getting to be evil, which is fine. So yeah, I'm loving it.
Oh, all the cool kids are off to the green zone. Yeah, they say it's like truly living the dream.
Please. We just want to be together.
It's important for people that grow up watching TV and film to see themselves represented. It's important for people to know that they are safe and welcome in this industry, that there is place for them and there is space at the table to create these stories. And for them to be told by the right people, just to know that they can do this. Like, yes, it's been years of, just very unwelcoming spaces, but, it's 2022, time to catch up, people.
Disabled voices are essential, and we still don't get enough exposure and things. And you just get, it's a whole cultural thing, it's a viewpoint, and it's creative and expressive, and it's just, it's been neglected for so long.
Having an entirely disabled cast felt like the most natural thing in the world. I never considered not to have one. As a disabled writer, I feel I have a huge responsibility to represent our community and show off the brilliant talent that we have both in front and behind of the camera. So making content also makes jobs for disabled artists, which is another added bonus. It's very important.
And release. Embrace your anger.
Pyramid of Disunion is about a woman called Angel, who is disabled, has been disabled all her life, and she essentially gets to a point where she's sort of been fed up with her relationships. People have just let her down, so she does something radical for her, which is go to a eco-commune, but to her surprise, one of her exes is actually there as a community member.
Angel?
David. Angel is the character that I play in the film. She's a feisty woman in her late 20s, and she's loosely based on me.
So Angel's a wheelchair user part of the time, and I think there's a thread through the whole thing which is very much about the lack of accessibility about the actual place.
You do realise that there is a free bicycle exchange service?
Even though the people in the community are kind of well-intentioned, a lot of the time she finds herself separated from the group and quite lonely in that sense.
I think you'll find us extremely inclusive here.
Collaboration between Jessie and I came about because we have worked together before co-directing, and she produced a short I made.
And action!
For me, it's been such a breath of fresh air working with a majority disabled crew.
I'll just move around a bit, Jesse, and find some nice stuff.
I've also had an access coordinator on this shoot, which I never had before because it's quite a new role. I hadn't thought how useful that would be. I'm so used to just getting by and struggling on, and having her has just been completely invaluable, actually.
So as an access coordinator, I'm really here to advocate for and sort of assess and work with disabled and neurodivergent cast and crew, so that they can get on with being, you know, their wonderful creative selves and do their jobs that they were without having to sort out all the extra bits themselves. On set, it's very much about the skills around advocacy and diplomacy and observation and getting to know people. The idea is access coordinators will be coming on right from the green light of a production. You know, having a look at scripts, when looking at a scene and saying, how can this be shot? Does it necessarily have to be done in this way? Is it going to be too difficult for the disabled person to do? The access coordinator, they in the end will save the production money because things are running smoother and often more safely for disabled and neurodiverse people.
I myself have a disability, but it's not visible, like you wouldn't necessarily know. I don't think it's necessarily true that someone non-disabled just cannot make a disabled story, but I think there is a kind of authenticity and lived experience which comes with it in a way that means that those kind of nuances of that experience, I think, would be lost if it wasn't a disabled kind of directorial written voice. I think, unfortunately, because the world is kind of set up in an ableist way, if you're kind of non-disabled, it's quite easy to miss a lot of these things. And I think the beautiful thing about this film is that it is a story about disability, but it's about much more, and the kind of nuances of the ableism and the disability more comes through in that like textured way. And I think that's because Ella was the person who wrote it.
I think it's gone well. There's been a really nice energy in the air, even though there's been some crazy challenges, like lots of rain and so on. But I think, yeah, my feeling in my heart is that it's going to be really nice.
Your pain is beautiful, Angel. So is yours.
Yes. Thank you so much for making that film, Justin, and also for creating those 4 incredible shorts. That was part of the 4 Love commissioned by Channel 4. I think my question is, I often find when I'm speaking with filmmakers, it's never the question of not wanting to do it. It's like the barriers, the financial barriers of like, how do I do that? How do I pay for these things? And how do I even begin to approach it? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's traditionally been a huge problem, is that access can be expensive. I mean, for example, we've just done a deaf drama, which was partly filmed in Germany. It's about the Nazi era and the way that deaf people were treated by the Nazis, which throws up some very surprising things. For example, we found in our research there was a deaf stormtrooper regiment, but then the Nazis turned on deaf people and wanted them exterminated. They went to death camps. But that film was very expensive, you know, and I mean, it is true, isn't it? I think that deafness is the most expensive disability in some respects, because you have to have sign language interpreters, and you have to have two because they have to spell each other. So you have to have two working at a time. So it can be like, you know, up to €1,000 a day for one person sign language interpreting. So on that film, you know, we had a huge budget, and on some of these Channel 4 films, we had deaf performers as well. So you have to go back to the broadcaster and say, look, you know, we don't have enough money to do this within the budget of our program. So you're going to have to give us the money. And that's what we've done at 104 Films over the years. You know, we've said, we've really pushed back against the broadcasters to say, you're telling us that you need more deaf and disabled and neurodiverse people on screen and behind the camera. And if you want that, then you have to pay for it. And they finally, I think, in the last few years, 2 or 3 years, I think they've started to listen. So now if you have a program commissioned by the BBC or Channel 4 in the UK, or ITV, then you can go to your commissioning editor, the production executive, and you can say, I need X amount of money. And sometimes you don't know how much money you're going to need at the start of a production, because you don't know how many disabled crew you're going to have. It's very intangible, and in this industry, we don't like that. You know, the production managers, the line producers don't like intangibility. They like everything to be nailed down. But that is something that they're having to deal with and get more familiar with. And thanks to the commissioners, we can do that.
And I think eventually that will just be a standard item in budgets. And in some places and in some parts of the industry, it already is. And that's how we're removing those systemic barriers. Because somebody might not tell you until halfway into the shoot that they may need, you know, an adjustment or some sort of access need. So we should never assume that even if there aren't any visible disabled people or people that have told us they may have access needs, we should never assume that this may not come up.
Oh, smash.
I think as a pitch to producers, you know, if there's producers in this room as well, if you're going to your broadcasters and say, well, you know, I'm going to put €50,000 into my budget additionally for the disabled crew, because we know we're making something like Campeones or a little something extra, or, you know, some other program or film which has a lot of disabled talent in front of or behind the camera, then, you know, if you don't spend all of that, you get to keep it.
Oh no, what a shame.
Which producers always want to hear.
In terms of, let's say you are on a shoestring budget, you don't have access to all of those funding. What sort of change in mindset, what sort of things can you practically put into place? Is it a situation of just asking people for their access requirements? What sort of shift in mindset would you like to see, even on like the smallest of budgets?
I mean, I think it's an attitudinal shift is the biggest thing. It's being open to having people who have disabilities on your set, because a lot of the time people will just, the biggest barrier is people just saying no, you know, because they're scared of disability. They're scared of doing the wrong thing, saying the wrong thing to disabled cast and crew, so they just won't have people on set. So I think it's being open, having a conversation, and there's a lot you can do with no money, you know. In the UK, we have a scheme called Access to Work, which is a government program, which provides meets the costs of reasonable adjustments for workers. It's not ideal, is it? It has a lot of problems. It's very problematic, and I don't know if there's a similar thing in Spain or not. But something like that can cost you nothing. You know, so if these people come along and they already have their access to work funding, they can fund their sign language interpreters or personal assistants or whatever else they might need to make the set accessible. So a lot of the time it's just working with people and taking the time. I always say that time is the biggest access requirement. If you have time to do something, even if you're making a short film for, you know, 25,000 euros, if you've got the time to implement accessibility features into your shoot and set, then you're onto a winner.
I really agree with Justin. I think the biggest thing that disables many people are the assumptions towards us by other people, and people not even considering us for certain opportunities. You know, I have a very visible condition, so people will judge my ability and productivity based on my appearance, and that's really annoying and means that then we have to overcompensate. We have, you know, that increases our internalized ableism, where disabled people hold ourselves to really toxic and unattainable standards of productivity and being, just to be able to conform into a dominant society. And yeah, as Justin said, a lot of adjustments actually don't cost anything, and it's just about talking, understanding, and you know, there's not, I don't think, one single person on this planet that is an expert in people's medical conditions. We are experts in our own, but what there are experts in are barriers and how we remove them for lots of different ways that disability, the experience of disability can arise. So I think there are lots of things we can do. We just have to be open to doing it and know it's going to benefit everybody.
Absolutely. And I think that's a point that was touched in the film of access coordinators save time and money because they've put these things into place, and therefore if you're pitching to a film fund or whoever exec you have in there, that's such a valid point in terms of...
Yeah, I just want to add, there's so much return on investment with accessibility. So I work with a lot of corporates where things like workplace adjustments or reasonable adjustments specialists are very commonplace. So this is happening already in many other industries and has happened and has really helped transform people's experiences. But there's a stat from the US for every £1 that is invested in accessibility, the return is $100. And we can't argue with that, can we?
That sounds pretty good to me, guys.
It almost sounds like a tax incentive for film.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because when we need to have these difficult conversations to ask for more money, these are the things we need to equip ourselves with. We need to understand. We need to talk in the language of funders as well. We need to tell them all these great things and all these amazing benefits.
Absolutely. Thank you. You touched on a point earlier, I think it was actually kind of both of you, I'm going to bring them together. So you touched on the fact of the Spanish film Campeones and having that disability representation. And Shani, you also touched on a point of like internalized ableism. Why is authentic representation so important? How can we disrupt our own internalized ableism? Because I feel like you mentioned the fact that the only representation you had growing up was children in need, which is pretty abysmal. And like my only sight loss representation growing up is the 3 blind mice, which I'm not a rodent, so it's not really ideal for me. But in terms of why is it so important to get disabled people telling their own stories?
I believe that mainstream culture survives and thrives on the fringes, on diversity. And there's a long history of that going back to the inception of cinema. So by listening to and making disabled voices available to a large audience on the big screen, you are perpetuating cinema and what we all do and what we all love. It makes sense to do that. Why would you not? And some of the great narratives of our time are, are disability narratives. In the UK we had the King's Speech, which is a disability narrative. We have Avatar, which is a disability narrative. You know, some of the biggest box office hits we can imagine about disability. So it makes perfect sense to give voice to the disabled community. And I think one of the issues we've had over the years traditionally, and this is where 104 Films, you know, and others like us want to change things, is that we don't have positive depictions of disability, and we don't have authentic depictions of disability. So often films are shown from a non-disabled perspective, and it's about loss, it's about sometimes the horror of disability, you know, in its crassest form. And we have to be very aware of that, which is why when we made these shorts with Film 4, we decided, myself and the executive Max Park at Film 4, that they should all be about love, because how often do we see disabled people in love, you know, making love, having sex on the screen, you know. It's something which is still a bit of a taboo, you know, and we wanted to show that in all its glory on the screen and get away from those kind of damaging tropes and narratives about disability, which we've all seen, you know. Quite often a common narrative might be somebody is disabled during the course of a film or TV show, and they have to in some way triumph over that disability. But you know, as these guys were saying, we may all become disabled at some point. It's not about triumphing over it. It's about reveling in it and loving being disabled and who you are, which actually is the answer to greater happiness for all of us, not just disabled people. That sounds like a hippie.
I love that answer. I love that. I agree
More
with
love.
everything. Yeah, I think I want to come at this from a bit of a different perspective. But it's really hard to live in a world where you just don't see yourself being represented, where the world isn't designed for you, where every day is a constant struggle, and on top, then you never see your stories or your lived experience or your reality ever being portrayed accurately. It's in an unimaginable type of erasure. It's like, I'm here and I exist, but where is my representation? Where are my people? And I definitely feel that as a South Asian disabled woman. Like, as I said, I'm nearly 40. I can count on one hand the amount of disabled people of colour that I have seen on screen. But the irony is that disability affects populations more from different global majority backgrounds. So even the little representation we do have, it isn't accurate and it isn't intersectional. And that's why intersectional inclusion and intersectional representation is so important. So let's imagine we've got people in society, they do not know any disabled people. They are going to form their views on disability from the films that you make or we watch in society, or from the books that we read. That is a responsibility. It's not just a nice thing to do. It's actually your responsibility. You are shaping, and you have the power to shape people's lives and how they will be treated. You know, it's very common for me to be trolled, to be harassed. People take pictures of me and I don't want them to do that. But why do people think that it's okay? I do think largely some of it does come down to how disabled people are represented. You were objects of pity, the jokes, villains. You know, where do we see disabled people in love? I want to see a disabled CEO. I want to see more disabled mothers. I want to see incidental representation of disability more.
Like the normalness of disability.
Just the average,
making a cup of tea, having a coffee.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I just also want to just flip the script a bit. Like, me having a short stature and living with my health condition is the most mundane thing about me. It's no different to me. Like, I've never known any different. So it's just another feature, just like I have brown hair, brown eyes. But could you imagine ever living in a world where we had no representation of people with brown coloured hair or brown coloured eyes? Like, that's how wild this is. Does that make sense?
That absolutely does make sense, and I think I'm seeing a lot of like nods in the crowd. I want to ask one more question before I open up to audience So I'm going to give you some time to brainstorm some questions. If you could see any representation, what would you want to see? Like, what joy, like, actually, you're an actor. What role do you want? What's your dream role?
No one's ever asked me this before. I want to be, I've just said people shouldn't be like bad or villains, but I think I'd be a really cool gangster.
Oh my God, love, yes.
Like, you know, a baddie.
Yes.
I think
You are a
I'd be
baddie,
really cool.
you're a baddie.
Yeah. I've just done a short film with Disney, which was written by Adam Pearson, who is an amazing disabled writer and actor. He's got an amazing film out at the moment. It's doing the round on film festivals.
A Different Man, A24.
Different Man. And I played... Well, he based the character on me, which was really lovely.
Love that.
So I really,
As you
really loved
should.
that. Yeah. I played like a wise oracle person. The film's Dragon Slayers. Go on, watch it if you can. But yeah, I think I'd love to be like a gangster.
I love
'cause I think
that.
that would be really cool.
Gorgeous. And Justin, what about you? What are you working on?
What I would like to see is a film like Campeones or like A Little Something Extra. I want to see a UK film which really punches through to the public consciousness, because we still struggle, don't we, I think, in the UK, despite a lot of the work we've done. There hasn't been a big, conspicuous kind of blockbuster hit which features disabled people, and I would love to see that. I don't know whether I'm going to be able to make that.
I think we could. I think let's manifest positive vibes. It's going to happen. We're all going to star in it. It's going to be a grand old time.
Starring Shani.
Yeah, absolutely. As a gangster. There we go. People are going to go see it. I'm now going to open up to the audience questions. So I don't know if we have a mic. We do. Yes, we do. I'm also going to grab our little headphones just in case it's going to be asked in Spanish or Basque. And I see a little hand being raised.
Sí, en castellano.
Yes, in Spanish. Yeah. Thank you. The sector of grants in administration, we give money to produce theater plays and audiovisual works. My question is, from your point of view, which is my biggest interest and why I'm here, how can we make it easier, really facilitate for that help to come through? I have a certain points. You present our work, and I can see your points in that. And very often we help. So what is the most important part to see those points? That the disabled people actually are the actors, for example, would that give more points to getting financial help from the administration, or that the subject of disability is dealt with? Both things can be done. I would like to know your opinion. What is more important, to see the disabled person on the screen, or that the subject is dealt with? Thank you.
Is that in English? Thank you so much for your questions, gracias. So I believe the question is, what's more important, having the disabled people and disabled talent on screen, or is it talking about disability, like having the disabled story being told?
I think it's a bit of both, but I also think you have to look at what type of representation that you have had and where's your starting point as well, because for there to be more stories or storylines or storytelling about disability, it might take seeing more disabled on-screen representation for that to happen. So I think it really depends on the historic representation as well. I think that might be a good place to sort of start, get some data points. I love data. It's a bit boring, but I think it really helps us to make solid points and fight for the things that we really want, including how money is allocated and why, and the rationale. But I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think every country in the world is on its own cultural journey with disability. And I mentioned the film Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll earlier on, which we had Andy Serkis playing a disabled guy. And that was in 2010, 14 years ago. And I don't think that would happen now, because he's a non-disabled actor, And I don't think he would take the role. I don't think his agent would want him to take the role. And I think audiences wouldn't accept him in that role. So I feel like authentic portrayals on screen is probably the first barrier, you know, that people need to get across. And that's one thing we've really focused on. And the work I do with Claire, we have a disability screen advisory group at the British Film Institute. And we set out a set of rules, a kind of mandate, didn't we, for what we'd like to achieve. And one of those was, we call it cripping up. Sorry to translators, I don't know how to translate this, but it means no non-disabled actors playing disabled roles in films. So no films funded by the British Film Institute will have non-disabled actors playing disabled roles. And I think that is probably the first thing, because that was one of the first things we did, Claire, wasn't it? You know, and that was really, really helpful, because then you're dealing with what people see on the screen, and that's really useful.
I do think that's quite this thing. I don't think it is radical, but in terms of like the film industry and setting out that as like a hard line is quite a radical thing to do. I still think there's a long way in terms of society accepting disabled actors in disabled roles, celebrating disability, disabled talent. It's incredibly hard to pinpoint an A-list disabled person in the film industry. And I think there's a lot to do with like awarding bodies in terms of the fact of like celebrating cripping up. At the Oscars, for example, it's something like 60 people have been nominated for playing a disabled role, and of those nominations, 50% then go on to win an Oscar.
What I find is interesting on that point is that, you know, some people, I mean, Mike Leigh, who's one of our, you know, the UK's greatest auteur filmmakers, who has a film here at the moment, Hard Truths, has a long history of clinical depression. And, you know, so has a disability. His new film is about clinical depression, I understand. And I think that's really interesting, but he would probably never identify as a disabled filmmaker, you know. And then you get big stars like Millie Bobby Brown, who is kind of the darling of Netflix, and is such a huge star, who is hard of hearing, you know. Many people don't even know that about her, that she's hard of hearing. So sometimes it's about getting people to connect with their own disability as well. And
the internalized ableism of it all, yes.
And I also recently saw a clip of Sharon Stone saying that she never got booked after her illness. And I was like, oh my God, she's such an icon. If she's gonna struggle, if
Sharon Stone can't get
if Sharon Stone is struggling for work, like what chance do other disabled people have? But coming back to the question, another sort of practical thing that I would add is there's so much low-hanging fruit. Don't be afraid to just go after what's the easiest thing to do as well, especially if it's, you know, a new thing or a different approach. Don't, just from a practicality perspective, there's so much that you'll be able to do quickly, and that's also a good place to start too.
Gorgeous. Thank you so much for that question. Do we have any other questions? I see one at the back. I see a hand. I believe a microphone is coming to you.
Good morning. I thank the three of you for all your ideas and image support that we had. I would like to ask you something. I don't belong to the film industry, so you might see that on my question. So in your career and your experience, how many times doing a shooting or a film or a short, everything was you were the starting point, or the other way around? Did a script writer or anybody else from the film industry ever, in your experience, approach you to suggest you this would be a good idea to do? So I try to know whether that works. Somebody coming to you and asking you, or it's always you the starting point and the one that holds all the energy for your film projects. Thank you.
Gorgeous. So I'm just going to reiterate that question. So has it always been you approaching executives or film funds, or has it been the other way? Have people been coming to you being like, we're interested in doing something around disability?
Yeah, I think it's been both, actually. For instance, Film 4, I mean, some may call me cynical, but Film 4 had some problems with the government of Boris Johnson, which was a right-wing government, and they were under threat. They were going to be privatised from being a public company into being a private company, and they had to look like they were servicing their public service remit as a broadcaster, and they're one of the 4 main broadcasters in the UK. So they came to us and said they wanted to do these films, which you watched the film about. So that was an example of that. Sometimes the political tides are useful and important in terms of getting funding for the kind of work that we do. But sometimes it is very much drawn from us, and we have an idea and a kernel, of an idea seed, and we take that to a broadcaster or a financier, and that they will say yes or no. And sometimes it's very difficult to talk to them about disability because they don't really understand it. They're not well versed in the politics of disablement like we are, so you have to communicate that to them. But they're getting better. They're really getting lots better, and there's a huge groundswell of people who are identifying as disabled now, and that is one of the big differences. Social media, for all its ills, is a really useful platform for getting disabled people together to talk about disability and in a new way, and identify as disabled, and that is really helping the education of people who don't really know much about disability and what it's all about, and things like the social model. Is really useful.
And that's why representation is important.
Absolutely.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
I'll quickly speak from the BFI perspective as a funding body, as somebody who funds films. We have accountability targets, so in terms of representation of who we're funding, what stories. So that's across all protected characteristics. So we have that for women, we have that for disability, we have that for race. In terms of what we do actually fund and whether we're hitting those targets, I think it's a lot easier in terms of short films, so on a smaller scale in terms of people at the start of their career. And I don't know whether that's to Justin's point in terms of younger people seem to feel less stigma around the word disability, so therefore identify as it. So we're really hitting those targets at a shorts perspective, but when it comes to features, I think we've still got a long way to go in terms of supporting directors, writers, from the very start of their career to mid-level opportunities to their first feature. So still a way to go, but it does feel like an exciting time to be in this industry as a disabled person. I feel like you've got something to say.
Yeah, it's true, and I think it is completely generational. I used the example of Mike Lee, who I think now is in his 80s, isn't he? But he's a great filmmaker, but doesn't identify as disabled, whereas we run a programme for the British Film Institute for young filmmakers aged 16 to 20 years old, and so many of those young filmmakers identify as disabled and are happy to put it on their application forms when they're applying for the funding, in a way that just didn't happen even 5 years ago, and I think that's tremendous.
Yeah, a massive shift in mindset. I saw you raise your hand, so I'm going to let a microphone come to you.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and for sharing your work. I am a diversity advisor here, focused on representation on screen, but also sometimes I do kind of advisor on regulations here in Spain. So for me and for the community, we're working on that. The BFI standard has been always like the path to follow, the way to follow. So maybe for me it could be very interesting to know your opinion, or if there's something that you are critical with, or if there's something that you are missing on how they are working, or I don't know, it's something that maybe we would like and we are dreaming to have here in Spain, obviously from the institution. So maybe if there's something that it doesn't work in anymore under your perspective, it would be great to know it by now. Yeah, thank you.
That's a good question. So let me rephrase that. Is there anything that isn't working for you currently? from a funding perspective from the BFI, Justin?
Well, I mean, I think it's been brilliant, and really the start of this all was disabled filmmakers coming to the BFI and saying they wanted a steering group, an advisory group made up of disabled people. There's a phrase in disability rights which is nothing about us without us, which was kind of the founding principle of the advisory group with the BFI, and it started from there. We have a great guy called David Proud who set up the group with Andrew Miller, who came from the arts world, and I think sometimes it's about learning from the wider cultural sector. And in the UK, we have a really strong disability arts scene, which grew out of the disability rights movement, which I was part of in the 1990s, which led to the UK's Disability Discrimination Act, which has now been superseded, of course. But that fed into the disability arts scene, and the punk movement tied into that as well, I think, you know, and people challenging the establishment. And I think that's kind of now filtered through to film. I feel like film is quite slow-moving sometimes, and it finds it a challenge to accept new voices and different perspectives. But that's how we did it. And I think getting in to different organisations as well, like, you know, we're now very active in BAFTA, for example, as well, you know, and you see a lot of disabled filmmakers. We had our first ever wheelchair user nominated for the BAFTA debut award this year, Ella Glendenning, who's great, who features in the film we just saw. So there've been a lot of changes in that as well. And I'm guessing, you know, that there are similar developments in the Goyas as well, you know, and this sort of thing. But I think that's really important to get to the heart of the film establishment, the people who are giving out the grants and the money, and making sure that they hear disabled voices.
Speaking as the Institute, the weight of the BFI on my shoulders. So obviously you mentioned the diversity standards, which if people don't know what the diversity standards are, it's a set of criteria that we have for all of our funding applications, whether that be filmmaking, film festivals, every single aspect. If we're going to award you money, you have to fill out the diversity standards. We have recently introduced a new diversity standard, on accessibility, yes! So that's one really incredible thing in terms of noticing that change is incremental, like we don't get it always right, like these things move, we have to change with the times. So that's one thing that we've done. You mentioned the work that we've done with the Disability Screen Advisory Group. David Proud came up with this idea of the Disability and Visible Difference panel. So in terms of films that we distribute, it started off on our audience fund. So any film that was submitted that had a theme of disability in the story was then sent around to this anonymous panel called Disability and Visible Difference Panel, and they reviewed it in terms of, is this authentic representation of disability? Is this contributing towards ableism? Is this inspiration porn? Is this traumatic? Is this highly problematic? And I think, obviously, this panel shouldn't have to exist. I think it's something that Jess mentioned in the film. We're working to a point where our jobs are redundant. We're living in a gorgeous, accessible utopia where there are just disabled people on the audience fund. There are people who are making these decisions, but we're currently not at that point. So what can we do in the meantime to address that problem? So that's what this Disability and Visible Difference panel is. It's now moved across also onto our filmmaking fund. So any script that's submitted in terms of disability representation, is read by disabled people, and again they provide feedback in terms of whether is this ableist or is this really good. And it's actually really great. In like the past few years, like the representation that's coming to us is really good. So that's really exciting. So that's something that we're specifically doing in terms of addressing a challenge that we've noticed. It's not perfect, but it is still something and is still contributing to hopefully less ableism within the industry, which is good.
And just to add, I think it's really important to recognise that progress is progress. We are really talking about a lot of culture change here, and that does not happen overnight. But Justin, you know, you've been in this industry for a very long time. You must have seen so much change. You know, so change is happening. It is slow, but you know, when it comes to things like standards, which are great, we have to remember that that's the minimum. And really, a good measure of success is what you can do to go above and beyond that as well. Not just about this, in lots of other different scenarios. And this is a piece of advice that I would give to anybody in any sector working on inclusion and accessibility.
Oh, I saw. I've got two hands.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Thank you so much for all of your invaluable contributions so far. I wondered, we've spoken about production and sort of pre and post and all of that sort of stuff, and on set. In terms of like the broader film industry and screen industries, how can they be more accessible? How can festivals be more accessible? How can distribution companies be more accessible? How can networking events be more accessible? Because, I mean, that networking's a huge one, because it's how people get around in the industry, it's how people make connections. So how can all of that, how can the entire film landscape start to think about being more accessible?
That is a juicy question.
It is. I mean, you know, I'm at a fairing, and you know, I was doing a networking breakfast this morning, and you know, I had to ask to be moved because I couldn't hear what anybody was saying. And, so it is a big issue. You know, we need to make spaces more accessible, and it's happening slowly, I would say. But I think part of it is having the access rider, not just in production, but also in terms of networking and wider industry events, because it doesn't happen as much as it should yet. I mean, people tend to think of you know, mobility, visual impairment, and deafness, cultural deafness, by which I mean sign language users. But they don't think of the 8 million people in the UK who are hard of hearing, like myself. You know, and I think that we need less hard spaces where the sound bounces around everywhere, you know, and things like that. You know, it just needs to be taken into account more.
Yeah, I think what I would add is understanding like that's a massive reason why disabled people are finding it difficult to be in the industry. And it's making sure that we're always thinking about and asking about accessibility. So, you know, I do a lot of keynote speaking. People always ask me what my dietary requirements are. Nobody ever asks me what my access requirements are. It's great that they want to feed me, but also check I can get to where I need to get to. So, yeah, you know, it's embedding things like that. And what I would also like to offer to this is don't view your work as complete or successful if you haven't factored in accessibility, especially when it comes to, you know, events and things like that. It's not, your work is not complete if you haven't thought about and you haven't factored in and asked people accessibility. And there are loads of different and very easy ways to do this as well. We can never preempt what somebody might need, you know, so it's just always best to ask and factor it in.
This is like my favorite thing in the whole entire world to speak about. So, okay. There's some really wonderful resources out there. There's a great organization called Forward Doc. They've recently done a report on film festival accessibility. That's run by Jim Lebrecht of Crip Camp, Lindsay Dryden. They're really incredible in terms of like recommendations on what you can be doing as a film festival provider, what film festivals are good at access. So I think sometimes like it's best practice and learning from others and knowledge sharing, which is so important in order to get more accessible. In terms of filmmaking, access materials, audio description, descriptive subtitles, things that make it so that deaf audiences can enjoy films, sight loss audiences can enjoy films. Thinking about that in terms of production, allocating budget to create those things, or even a mind shift in distribution companies. Distribution companies should just be creating those as standard. That should be a standardized thing. And then there's another thing that I want to say in terms of like networking. There's a really good resource on BFI. It's BFI Fan, which is our audience network, and it's all about how to run accessible events. So it has everything from how to self-describe, things on support animals, how to get sign language interpreters, what's live subtitling, thinking about all these different access requirements and measurements that you can put into place that will transform somebody's experience from attending an event to be horrific to this was incredible, this is the first time I felt seen and can actually participate in this event. So that's my piece on it. If you don't know what that is, come speak to me afterwards and I can actually send you those documents. I think we have time for one more audience question, so I'm going to pass on over to you and then we'll wrap up.
Well, thank you very much for today. It was great to listen to you, and it was very nice to see BFI as well here. I'm myself director of photography. I've been living in the UK for 10 years. It's pretty nice to actually see Jessie and Ella. I've worked with them. It was really nice to see them. When talking about disability, like a lot of times we talk about from a production point of view or from the funders, people who actually give the money, but myself, when I work on set with disabled people, it was always like either a script supervisor or AD, writer or director. But then there is like certain departments that maybe it's harder to actually get disabled people to work on it. And as head of department myself and working with camera and lighting, I wonder how easy it is for us to actually help people who are disabled to get on board. Like usually when you're on set, you have to rush around, you have very limited time, and how to implement maybe a workflow to have people in the crew who are disabled, and what could we do as head of departments to push productions or to learn ourselves. Are there resources around there? Because obviously maybe you're not fully aware of what other crew member will need to be there and support you and work together. Is there something that us as heads of department can do in technical departments during the shoots and in productions?
Absolutely. I'll just paraphrase that. So what can HODs do to get crew or disabled crew in more technical roles? You're a training provider, Justin. You work with young people. Perhaps you can speak to this.
I do, yeah. I think it's about taking risks, really, and that's people just have to jump off that cliff, and say, right, we're going to take the person who perhaps isn't as experienced because they haven't done as much stuff, but we will make it work with them. The deaf production I mentioned earlier that we did, we had a deaf first assistant director, and he hadn't done a lot of first assistant directing. He was quite inexperienced, and we were a little bit uneasy about giving him the job. And all of his assistants, the second AD, the third AD, they were all deaf, or they did sign language, and it was brilliant. It just saved so much time on set, actually, because we were dealing with an entirely deaf cast. Maybe we had 2 hearing actors in there or something like that. And the director was deaf. Many of the crew were deaf. The deaf hair and makeup designer, deaf production designer, etc. And lots of people in the lower down in the crew. So it's just taking that risk, I think, really, and giving them the opportunity, which we've all been subject to that, I guess, as filmmakers earlier on in our careers, where people gave us the opportunity, and using it as a positive rather than a negative against employing somebody and giving them that opportunity. I'm a big believer in that. And actually, like I say, on this production, it saved us so much time because of the communication issues.
Do you have anything else to add?
I think I would say definitely take the risk, but not seeing disabled people as a risk. And I think that's what I hear a lot of in this industry. Oh, we can't make this film because no one's interested in this topic, or, it's a risk if we fund this. But it's not. Like, disabled people exist. 1 in 4 of us, are disabled. We aren't a minority. We're an over-excluded massive group of people. Yeah, and don't ever think there's a lack of disabled talent out there. That's another thing that I always hear. Oh, we couldn't find anyone, or, we tried, we did auditions, and then the notion of people being hard to reach comes in. No community is hard to reach. It's that you probably don't know how to get your messages out to them. Not you personally, the industry. So yeah, I think it's probably working in a bit of a different way. talking to people that are well connected with, deaf, neurodivergent, disabled talent, and also being an ally for us as well. Like, there are loads of disabled people that will be able to move around the set very quickly. It's not assuming that people won't. There may be some that won't, but, it's just working with us, and then maybe that could be time that's built in, for example, because it makes it it's a less pressurized environment for everybody, and a much more, I think, happier, accessible set.
Oh, yeah. I think there's a lack of opportunity, not a lack of talent.
And also, to the point of signposting, there are other communities out there. Just go directly to the communities and find those links. I know that it can sometimes be difficult and it involves a lot of research, but it's really worthwhile. I believe we've reached our 90-minute mark, guys. This has been so gorgeous to have so many smiling faces. You've been listening to us yap on about disability for 90 minutes, but this has been truly joyous, and to hear your questions and how engaged you are has been fantastic. A huge thank you to San Sebastian, to the people handing out the microphones, to the people up there. It's so special to be here and to discuss disability on a film festival stage. So thank you so much. And a huge thank you to both you, Shani, to you, Justin. It's been incredible to hear your lived experience and for sharing all your knowledge. It's been incredible. So before you rush off, I would really love if you just took the time to think about one thing that you could implement in your own practice, whether that's filmmaking, whether that's whatever industry you're in, on what you're going to do in terms of making a change to include more disabled individuals. But thank you so much, everyone. This has been gorgeous.